Thank you to Father Steve. Thank you to Claire for the wonderful introduction this evening. Thank you to the library and to the St. Peter's Seminary Foundation and the Institute for Catholic Formation for their roles in bringing together this evening. In addition to this being Theological Libraries Month, today turned out to be a more providential day than we could have realized given the theme that we're looking at this evening, which is the development of Jewish-Christian relations, specifically Jewish-Catholic relations in the last 50 years. As some of you in the Catholic world may be aware, for this week and next week, bishops from all over the Middle East are gathered together with the Pope in the Vatican for a synod dealing with issues in the Middle East of Christianity. And for the first time today, for the first time in Catholic history, the Pope invited a rabbi to specifically address the full synod, Rabbi David Rosen, who is one of the top Jewish Orthodox spokespersons in interreligious dialogue, who gave a lecture this afternoon, which was historic, dealing with the situation of Jews and Christians, specifically in the Holy Land. Now, fortunately, David and I are friends. And David was kind enough to send me copies this afternoon of his text just hours after he presented it in the Vatican. And I have some copies here, if anybody would be interested. I think it complements, in some wonderful ways, some of the things that I'm going to say this evening. And you would hear from a different perspective from the Jewish side, and from a very prominent rabbi who's been involved for upwards of 30 years in Jewish Catholic and Jewish Christian dialogue. Well, this evening our theme is When Rome Meets Jerusalem. What's at stake after 50 years of Jewish Catholic dialogue? The world as we know it began to change on a Monday morning in June of 1960. Most people weren't aware of it, of course, and a 20-minute meeting between two old men in Italy passed largely unnoticed in the following morning's newspapers. But out of a brief conversation in Rome came one of the most momentous revolutions in the course of theological history, a revolution whose consequences are continuing to shape and orient and challenge the world today. One of those two old men was already world famous in 1960. Born Angelo Giuseppe Roncalli, he was better known to the world as Pope John XXIII, one of the most loved popes in the 20th century. The other was Jules Isaac, one of France's most distinguished historians and a French Jew who had suffered the heartbreaking loss of most of his immediate family during the Holocaust. Hiding in barns and attics to stay ahead of the Nazis, Isaac had applied his time and analytical skill during the war to wrestling with one gut-wrenching question. Why was it that Europe's Christians seemed to bear such a manifest hostility toward Jews, both in terms of actively persecuting and killing them, but to a much greater degree, simply standing by and allowing the worst of crimes to be perpetrated against Jewish men, women, and children without intervening? Relying on books smuggled to him by his sympathetic friends, Isaac had concluded that this centuries-old Christian hostility was, in fact, rooted in a flawed and badly skewed reading of the New Testament and a number of highly questionable historical and theological assumptions, which he compiled into a weighty analysis published in French in 1947 called Jesus and Israel. And now, almost at the end of his life, the octogenarian Jew had come to plead with the octogenarian Catholic Bishop of Rome that the Ecumenical Council announced by Pope John a year earlier should take up as one of its discussion points a revision of Catholic teaching about Jews and Judaism to ensure that a horror like the Holocaust could never occur again. As he entrusted his dossier of research to the Pope, Isaac asked tentatively, "May I leave with at least some hope?" To which John famously replied, "You are entitled to more than just hope." That one brief but heartfelt conversation sparked a chain reaction of events that continues to unfold in our own time, with popes who today visit Auschwitz at Jerusalem's Western Wall, with bishops who are welcome guests in many synagogues, with warm friendships between priests and nuns and rabbis, and with enough official church documents to fill a small filing cabinet. Exactly 50 years ago this year, and yet I would argue we are only at the very beginning of the revolution Jules Isaac and Blessed John XXIII inaugurated together. and a revolution that few Catholics and few Jews are even aware of. At the outset of the 20th century, there were few signs suggesting it would be a century of renewal and transformation in Jewish-Catholic relations. On the contrary, centuries of anti-Jewish preaching in Catholic circles, extremely literal readings of certain biblical texts, had produced a widespread contempt for Jews among many Catholics in much of the world. Catholic newspapers and magazines regularly published anti-Jewish articles and commentaries that made up a sadly consistent message disparaging Judaism and often painting individual Jews in dark and very sinister colors. And on Good Friday, the world's Catholics prayed ardently for the conversion of the Jews in these not exactly complimentary words. Almighty and ever-living God, who does not drive away from your mercy even the perfidious Jews, hear the prayers which we offer for the blindness of that people, that having acknowledged the light of your truth, which is Christ, they may be delivered from their darkness. No one could have imagined then the mind-boggling proportions of the genocide that would be the Holocaust, or the dramatic changes it would provoke in Christian theology. Isaac's meeting with Pope John marked a dramatic turning point in that relationship, although it would take years and decades to fully flower. The material Isaac had prepared was passed on to another historic figure, the German Jesuit Cardinal Augustin Bea, one of the most highly respected Catholic biblical scholars of his generation. The Pope's instructions gathered together a working group of priests with expertise in the Bible and Judaism and begin to sketch out the outlines of a schema on the Jews for discussion at the upcoming Vatican Council. One of the key figures in that small circle of scholars would actually be a young German-Canadian Augustinian friar named Gregory Baum, who was one of the main document's main drafters. This is not the place to trace the fascinating but tortured history of that particular document, which was among the most controversial, hotly debated, and most eagerly anticipated of all Vatican II's 16 documents. It would be repeatedly redrafted, and at one point actually withdrawn from the council floor. Some traditionalist bishops rejected its friendly tone toward Jews as unbiblical, and a number of Middle Eastern patriarchs protested that if it were passed, such a document would compromise the very delicate situation of the Christian minorities in Arab nations, where it would be read as a political endorsement of the young state of Israel, provoking violence and perhaps even the expulsion of their Christian minorities. The document, however, was finally approved by the bishops on October 28, 1965, by a vote of more than 95% in favor, a stunning degree of support largely credited to the personal persuasiveness of Cardinal Bea and the late Pope John, who had himself been swayed into action by his conversation with Jules Isaac 5 years earlier. The declaration itself was called Nostra Aetate, in our age, and represented the first major Catholic document on non-Christian religions. Its famous paragraph 4 was specifically dedicated to the question of Judaism, and its clear-cut condemnation of anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish violence, together with its rejection of the traditional view of Jewish people as eternally punished because of their alleged place and their alleged role in Christ's crucifixion, marked a watershed moment in modern religious and political history. It was more concise and sparse than many of the bishops would have preferred, but it was nonetheless a massive accomplishment, one of the most revolutionary of the Council's documents, and one that even today remains the fundamental orientation for Catholics at every level in their relationship with Jews. It is no exaggeration to say that Jewish-Catholic dialogue was officially inaugurated in 1965, exactly 45 years ago this month, and modern religious historians point to Nostra Aetate as a catalyst that prompted other Christian bodies to embark on dialogues of their own with the Jewish community. In a very real sense, Nostra Aetate would likely never have occurred had it not been for the meeting of Jules Isaac and John the 23rd on a fateful June Monday in 1960, half a century ago this year.